Order of the day number 2.
Westpac New Zealand Bill, second reading.
Mr. Speaker.
Chris Tremaine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that the Westpac New Zealand Bill be now read a second time. I move this bill on behalf of my colleague, Chairman of the Financial and Expenditure Committee, Craig Foss, who is currently representing the government in Hanoi at the Asian Development Bank AGM. Craig has been shepherding this bill through the House and will continue to do so as it progresses from this point forward. This is a private bill promoted by Westpac New Zealand Limited, and it provides a mechanism to enable certain assets and liabilities of Westpac Banking Corporation in New Zealand, being principally assets and liabilities of Westpac Banking Corporation's New Zealand institutional banking business, to be vested in its New Zealand subsidiary, Westpac New Zealand Limited. Westpac is one of New Zealand's oldest financial institutions. This year, it is celebrating its 150th anniversary in this country. Westpac is one of 4 banking groups that have dual banking registration in New Zealand. It operates in New Zealand through both a branch, Westpac Banking Corporation New Zealand branch, and a locally incorporated subsidiary, Westpac New Zealand Limited. Westpac New Zealand Limited was incorporated and became a registered bank in 2006 in order to comply with the Reserve Bank of New Zealand's local incorporation policy. That policy provides that systemically important banks should be incorporated in New Zealand. A bank is regarded as systemically important if it has liabilities, other than those to related parties, in excess of $15 billion. Westpac Banking Corporation New Zealand branch has a condition of registration which provides that its external liabilities are not to exceed this amount. Having regard to the local incorporation policy, Westpac Banking Corporation and Westpac New Zealand Limited have agreed with the Reserve Bank that Westpac Banking Corporation will transfer certain assets and liabilities, being principally assets and liabilities of its New Zealand institutional banking business, to Westpac New Zealand Limited. The transfer will reduce the size of the New Zealand branch and help to ensure that it continues to remain below its external liability cap, both in periods of growth and market volatility going forward. The transfer will also mean that Westpac New Zealand Limited will increase in size. This is beneficial in terms of the local incorporation policy, as it will allow the Reserve Bank to have greater control over the assets and liabilities being transferred were there ever to be a bank failure event. Mr. Speaker, when Craig Foss moved the first reading of this bill, he noted that legislation is the only means by which the designated assets and liabilities can be invested in Westpac New Zealand Limited efficiently and economically without disrupting the conduct and continuity of Westpac's New Zealand banking business. The bill also ensures minimal disruption to Westpac's customers, employees and suppliers. The Select Committee has made some minor amendments to the bill. These are marked up on the bill on the table, and Amy Adams and other members of the Select Committee, I'm sure, will pay close detail to these amendments to make sure that these are clear to the New Zealand public going forward. And I'm looking forward to Amy's speech in this regard. I wish to offer my thanks to members of the Finance and Expenditure Committee for their thorough examination of the bill and for ensuring the timely return of the legislation to the House. FEC is indeed an excellent committee with membership across the House, which does extremely good work in this House, and I'd commend them for their work here. I'd also like to acknowledge the constructive cross-party examination on this issue. It is important when dealing with these sorts of matters to reach consensus where possible. A strong and functional banking system is important to New Zealand, and as Craig noted when he moved the first reading of this bill, in a small but important way, this bill helps make the banking system of New Zealand stronger. Mr. Speaker, I commend this bill to the House.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. Stuart Nash.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm quite saddened, actually, Mr. Speaker, that I missed David Bennett's climax to his career. To be thanked for actually passing the Piranha Park Bill, a crowning achievement he'll be able to go to the electorate with and say, after 6 years, I achieved this for the people of Hamilton. But at least he didn't sell it. At least he didn't sell it. Unless, maybe he's planning to, I don't know, but he didn't sell this one. He might have even nationalised it. But anyway, Mr Speaker, it's good to follow on from Chris Tremaine because, as Mr Tremaine said, every member in this House, every party in this House, I think, supports this bill. Mr Foss brought it to Select Committee. Actually brought it to the House. It's a common sense bill, and Labor actually does support it. There are a number of reasons why we support this bill, Mr Speaker. It's common sense, it's absolutely necessary legislation, and Labor has always supported any sort of financial legislation that we believe improves the business integrity and government efficiency. So what you will find is the vast majority of bills that come through this House that actually do support business integrity and that do support government efficiency and also increase the ability of everyday New Zealanders to have confidence in financial markets, Labor will support. And I know over the last 2 or 3 or 3 or 4 weeks I have spoken on a number of these bills. It's a common sense approach. Of course, Mr Speaker, there are certain types of bills when it comes to banks that we don't support. And the classic one is we certainly would not support the sale of Kiwi Bank, which that government wants to do. We certainly would not support the sale of BNZ. And I think we heard today that the BNZ was sold for $1.5 billion and it's returned in dividends over $15 billion. That is the sort of banking legislation we certainly would not support. Because I think, Mr Speaker, if anyone is unclear about it, let me just clarify, Labor certainly does not support the sale of state assets, of which Kiwi Bank is a state asset that's owned by all of us. Now, what this bill does, Mr Speaker, is it provides for the vesting of certain assets and liabilities. Mr Speaker, have I just heard Simon Bridges say that he thinks Kiwi Bank should be sold? Is that what he said? Mr Bridges, I challenge that member.
A point of order, Tom McLean.
The member opposite's got to get his hearing checked. Nobody on this side of the House said that at all.
No, look, that's not a point of order, but I will ask the member to... This is a second reading speech, not a first reading speech, to come back to the content of the debate.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I just would like to ask... I obviously did hear Simon Bridges wrong, but I would love that member to hold a public meeting around asset sales in Tauranga and try and convince his constituents that it's a good idea. But anyway, Mr Speaker, what this bill does is it provides for the vesting of certain assets and liabilities of the Westpac banking corporations, New Zealand institutional businesses in Westpac, New Zealand. This can only be achieved through legislation, and Simon Bridges is dead right. Bill English does know about selling state assets because he sold Contact Energy. Bill English sold Contact Energy in 1999, the company that returns over $100 million worth in dividends every year to its Australian owners. So, yes, Simon Bridges is dead right. Bill English does know about nationalising, about selling state assets. Now, this is the sort of bill, Mr Speaker, where, in fact, legislation is the only means by which the assets of Westpac Banking Corporation, New Zealand retail business, can be invested in Westpac New Zealand. Now, there are 2 reasons for this, Mr Speaker. First, it is the only means by which Westpac Banking Corporation, New Zealand retail business, can be vested in Westpac efficiently and economically without interference in the contact and continuity of the banking business. And Mr Tremaine talked about this. It's the reason why this bill has come through Finance and Expenditure Select Committee, and it's most important because there can be no disruption to Westpac's business and customer base. So that there's no doubt. The seamless, it's very important for this, not only the customers but for the staff as well. And I've spoken many times in this House about the need for a strong and robust banking sector. And I think the vast majority of people will agree that one of the main reasons why this country, this economy made it through the recession in the shape it did, well, there are 2 main reasons. One, the fiscally prudent way under which Dr Cullen had managed the economy and reduced government debt to such a level there was none. And the second reason is because we had a strong banking sector. We had a very, very strong banking sector. So Mr Cullen, Dr Cullen and the banking sector ensured that we got through this economic crisis in the shape we did. It is just an absolute shame that Dr Cullen's legacy has been ripped apart in 2 years by that government. What a shame. Actually, it used to be called the Cullen Fund. Dr Cullen said, can you please remove my name from that because he's so embarrassed by what that government is doing to the fund that he set up to provide for the savings of New Zealanders. And Mr Bridges had the nerve to stand up and ask a question in the House about what we're doing for savings. He should have asked the Minister, why did Bill English cut funding to the Cullen Fund? That is what... Of course, Mr. Speaker. Well, let's bring it back to the bill we've got in hand here. It's just when Simon Bridges stands up, or sits up and he says, sell state assets, cut funding to the Cullen Fund, it's hard not to respond, Mr. Speaker, and you must please... Anyway, as mentioned, this legislation is the only means by which appropriate amendments to and appeals of existing legislation can be effected, as Westpac Banking Corporation currently operates under legislation in New Zealand through the Westpac Banking Corporation Act 1982. The private Act of Parliament approach has commonly been used for bank mergers in the past. For example, we've had the National Bank of New Zealand Act 1994 and the Westpac Banking Corporation Act 1982. I think everyone knows this. Everyone knows how the finances and the banking industry works, don't they? Or am I mistaken? Has Mr Bridges got no financial literacy whatsoever? Mr Bridges once again has admitted he knows nothing about the banking sector, and yet he had the nerve to stand up and ask his finance minister about what that government is doing for savings policy. He knows nothing. He knows nothing. But no, to give Mr Bridges credit, he did stand up in the House in a moment of honesty and admit that he had lost half the cases he brought as a public prosecutor. But anyway, this bill is important, as I was saying, Mr Speaker, to strengthen the local banking sector. It is most important we have a strong local banking sector. It's already been alluded to that Australasia came out of the financial crisis well, and as mentioned, the reason we did is we had a strong banking sector. Amy Adams knows that. Amy, I think you need to go and tell Simon just to keep quiet because he doesn't know what he is talking about. But that's okay.
Point of order, now, Simon Bridges.
The rules of this House meant that a member's full names needed to be used in debate.
Well, the member's right, but the member is asking for this, so he has to expect something in retaliation.
Point of order, Mr Speaker?
No. There'll be no more... No,
okay, sorry.
The member will continue, and I do say to the member that, and I've given plenty of leeway on this, there's about 2 minutes remaining, that when we're on a second reading speech, there's a number of speakers' rulings, and I refer the member to 106.1 and 105.5 about the content of a second reading. To mention other things is fine, and I allowed that, but continue, even if it's responding to interjections, one must stay with the content of the bill as presented from the Select Committee, and that's what a second reading debate's about. Stuart Nash.
As I was saying, we support this bill, and the Reserve Bank actually also supports it. We also understand it is very important that Westpac New Zealand has a very sound and stable New Zealand operations and enjoys the advantages and benefits of being linked to its Trans-Tasman parent. For example, it has to have access to capital so it can lend to its business customers. And if there's one thing we need at the moment, if there's one thing this economy really, really desires, and that's for banks to have the capital to lend to businesses. Because goodness me, there's no other plan shown by that government to get business growth up and running. So they need the support of the banks. As mentioned, the Reserve Bank backs this bill. It is a common sense bill, supported by everyone in the Finance and Expenditure Select Committee and by everyone in the House. But once again, I would like to make the point that I made in the first reading. And I'll make again that I think that Westpac should be aware that something that's demanded by the vast majority of New Zealanders, in fact by all New Zealanders, is the level of transparency that New Zealanders like to see in their banks. We all understand the need for a strong banking sector. Of this there is no doubt, and this side of the House understands this more than most. And our banking system held it up very well. But, Mr Speaker, what we tried to do is encourage a level of transparency in the banking sector such that people have, that ordinary New Zealanders, everyday New Zealanders have a level of confidence in the bank. This is one of the